I would like to thank the asshats at Kotaku for reducing the US military to nothing more than war criminals. Hello, this is Mara Jade, and I'm back after a brief hiatus with another video on a gem entitled You Don't Have to Run the Exclusive Reveal for the War Crime game. Now, the war crime game in question is 6 Days in Fallujah. The game that these fucking morons cannot stop bitching, pissing, and moaning about. The game that these fucking morons cannot stop putting their narrative spin onto. And the game these fucking morons will inevitably help boost the sales of. Because again, they won't fucking shut up about it. Now, me personally, I'm still on the fence with this game. I'm not passing final judgment until I see final product necessarily, because all we see is the alpha footage, but not exactly impressed with it. However, I might buy this purely out of fucking spite at this point, just to make them cry. Whether or not I play it is irrelevant, because all it needs to show is one big, huge sales figure on my end. That's all that matters. That's what'll make them cry, and that's all I care about at this point. But at any rate, let's dive into this article so I can give my 2 cents on the spin from Kotaku. Please fade into irrelevancy. I fucking hate you people. Let's go into this. Rebooted war crime simulator. Thank you again for that, you fucking idiots. 6 Days in Fallujah got its official gameplay reveal yesterday in a new trailer that seems to confirm some people's criticisms, there I fixed it for you, criticisms, of the game as one-sided propaganda for the US war machine. Thank you so much for that. The trailer was debuted exclusively by IGN, the same website, can't spell ignorant without IGN, that just days earlier ran an in-depth report, yeah, fucking right, on the problems surrounding the game and the apparent one-sidedness with which it would make, quote, a playable documentary out of one of the deadliest sieges in the US invasion of Iraq. That's not uncommon for first-person shooter games, particularly with a military focus on it. 3 words, you fucking clowns. Call of Duty. 2 words. Modern Warfare. You had, again, the Cold War, the Black Ops Cold War game that came out not that long ago. Guess it's centered on historical events set during the Cold War. Not unfucking common. But if you're looking for historical perspective on this event and you're going to a game to get it, then you are a fuckhead. No 2 ways about it. You want a genuine perspective, you crack open a fucking book. You don't go to a first-person shooter game for that. Moving on. United States military veteran Sergeant Jason Kyle and the developers at Victoria and Highwire Games walk you through the first ever gameplay video of 6 Days in Fallujah, the tactical first-person shooter. Those are the fucking key words there. Tactical first-person shooter. That's the core of this fucking game. They could have picked literally any fucking historical event at this point. It wouldn't have mattered to you people. You would put whatever spin you could on it. With procedurally generated mission spaces based on real-life events from 2004's Second Battle of Fallujah and the Iraq War, IGN's description of the free publicity reads. Again, they could have picked pretty much any historical event. The fucking Vietnam War, for example. There was some guerrilla tactics there as well. You would still put your spin on it. The video focuses on the squad tactics you'll use to break into people's homes and, quote, clear them of, quote, enemies. I will get back to this because I'd like to go into what enemies we actually face, because guarantee the person who's writing this, Ethan, does not have one fucking clue in his teeny tiny little brain. His small peepee energy would not allow him to form a rational thought at all what these enemies could possibly be. But I'll describe it for you. It highlights how layouts will constantly change to capture the feeling of not knowing what you'll find every time you step into a new room. The gameplay ends with the player busting into a room where a family of 4 hides in the corner hoping to not get murdered. Fuck you! Fuck you! If they're innocent, they have nothing to worry about. They had nothing to worry about whatsoever. So Thank you again for painting us as criminals. I fucking hate you, Kotaku. Burn in fucking hell at this point. The video then cuts to real-life documentary footage as a resident of Fallujah explains that their dad refused to leave the city during the assault. A lot of people did, but then, we'll go into, they were forcibly kept from leaving the city. As the U.S. military believes many of Fallujah's men are guerrilla fighters, it has instructed U.S. troops to turn back all males aged 15 to 55, the Associated Press reported in 2004. Again, I will go into the enemies we actually face and why, as sad as this concept is, as sad as this reality is, why we had to fucking do that. You don't look into the reasons why, no, you just look at this is the what that's happening, and we must be the bad guys. The trailer doesn't mention accounts of indiscriminate gunfire by the U.S. military either. Show me what those accounts, particularly what those accounts come from. Genuine accounts? They're coming from people who wanted to paint us already back then as bad guys. I know essentially what accounts you're talking about, and I know where they're coming from. When I joined the military, arguably I joined the military in 2005, so it was about a year after these events took place. But I read those accounts. I read a lot of them. I dare you to fucking prove what you're writing here. As well as the reportedly used white phosphorus in the attack, a chemical that literally melts through your body. Reportedly used. Reportedly, allegedly. Show me the proof. Show me the proof it wasn't us and not the terrorists that were twisting the narrative and using the mainstream media as their little puppets in the United States. Show me the proof. Right there. Again, I read the reports. I'm a U.S. military veteran. Are you, Ethan? No, you're not. I know you're not. The total number of deaths since the invasion of Iraq began is disputed. There's a reason why it's disputed, but the Iraq Body Count Project, another one you can take with a huge grain of salt, currently estimates 288,000 people have died, the majority being civilians. Why it's disputed is the fucking fact that a lot of them were killed because of the terrorists who would fire rockets indiscriminately into crowds, who would shoot indiscriminately into crowds. They're the ones who would shoot indiscriminately into crowds because who cares if they killed their own local populace? They were sending them to Allah and a happy afterlife. That's what their perspective was. Or setting off IEDs indiscriminately and killing the local populace. Did you take that into fucking account? And reporters who covered the war have documented the litany of excuses from the U.S. government defending these deaths as anything but war crimes. I don't fucking like reporters, to be perfectly honest with you. You're one of them. It's this side of the history that IGN dug into just last week. Just last week! It happened in 2004, 17 fucking years ago. They're just digging into it last week because they have to find whatever they can to put whatever spin they can onto this. Again, you can't spell ignorant without IGN. An important piece of reporting entitled 6 Days in Fallujah is complicated and painful for those who connected to the real events. I served with Iraqi civilians. Some of which were connected to those real events when they were able to leave. Because I served in Iraq in 2011. The article interviews several people. Alex, a Lebanese Arab game developer. Lebanon, not Iraq. Yafat Sheikh, an Iraqi Jewish game developer. Okay. And a Muslim developer who wished to remain anonymous, probably because there's still evil people out there who don't like it when fellow Muslims, I'm just saying, because based on my own personal experience, talk to Western media about their concerns and skepticism regarding yet another shooter glorifying the sacrifices of those in the U.S. military. They're speaking from perspective of just whatever they're reading in the headlines, in the articles. Have they actually looked into the game? Most likely not. Have they actually looked at the test footage? No, most likely not. Have they actually looked at the alpha footage? Most likely not. Have they actually looked at all the comments the developers have made? Most likely not. Because this is all they care about. Glorifying the sacrifices of those in the US military. Now, I can only speak for myself as a military vet. What exactly is wrong with that? I'm not saying that you have to like every decision that the US military made. Hell, fucking hell. I disagreed with a lot of decisions they made. But why is it a bad thing when you are not glorifying, but demonstrating the sacrifices we had to go through? The decisions we had to make, the moral dilemmas we had to face. What's wrong with that? Basically, when we look at a piece of media, we have to ask ourselves, what is it trying to tell us? Who is it serving? Who will have the most to gain from the acceptance of this media is the truth? What fucking question is that? I would argue that it's not the Iraqi civilians, Sheikh told IGN. It's a fucking first-person shooter game that happens to be set during historical events, but it's not exactly entirely, strictly historical in its nature. Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, set during the Cold War era. Not exactly entirely historically accurate, because at its fucking core, it's a first-person shooter game. As a 6-minute commercial for the game, these aren't the types of questions the latest trailer is concerned with. No, because it's a game. When Peter Tamte, the head of the original studio behind the game and its current publisher, was pressed on these issues in yet another interview, this time on the latest episode of IGN's Unfiltered, he didn't have any real answers, because most of what you do is pitch gotcha questions so you can trap them into saying something that will boost whatever narrative you want to push. That's why you need to fade into irrelevancy. That's why gaming journalists are a fucking joke at this point. They take themselves way too seriously sometimes when they're reporting this stuff, and they don't report just on the games. They had to put their own spin on it. They had to put whatever narration, no matter how devoid of reality it is, onto it. So of course they're not going to get any real answers, because no matter what the poor schmuck says, you're going to spin it however you want to. Iraqi stories and testimonials were obtained for the game, but will make up a much smaller portion of the game than the first-person tactics employed by US Marines, because that's the fucking focus. I'm sorry if you don't like that. You don't like it, don't buy the game. But I'm pretty much betting that they got more stories and testimonials than you fucking did. IGN and Kotaku combined. He described the invasion of Iraq not as a grave injustice with a staggering death toll, but as controversial. It was very controversial. Very controversial. Like I said, I didn't agree with every decision the U.S. military made, and I served in the U.S. military. Whether or not you agree with the reasons for going in, the fact remains, we deposed a dictator. I served with civilians, like I said, or at least I served in Iraq in 2011 alongside Iraqi civilians because we were helping them put together an agency much like what I did in the U.S. military. Do you know what one of them asked me? He asked, well, me and others I should say, what some of the best states to live in the United States were. Now, you might ask why he was asking that? Because he knew that once we left, the shit was really going to hit the fan. He knew that our presence there was stopping the atrocities, worst atrocities, from happening. If they actually at all saw us as an occupying force, I'm talking about every Iraqi citizen saw us as an occupying force, he wouldn't have cared to ask us about where the best place to live in the United States was. He wouldn't have cared about asking because he wanted to move his family, because he was scared to death about what would happen once we left. No, it would be good riddance, sayonara, and we'll move on. Most people don't know that. Most people don't realize that because they're only going off of what was reported in the news. And I, as what I did in the military, could not say anything because of what I read. So I had personal perspective, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was whatever the media could push. And then what the media could push was us being the bad guys. The US being the bad guys. No matter fucking what. It's really bothered me that here we have this battle that is one of the most significant battles in the Western world in nearly half a century, but Hollywood has been afraid to tell these stories. Just because the war in Iraq was controversial doesn't mean that it isn't filled with stories of sacrifice, Tamte told IGN's Ryan McCaffrey. It's filled with sacrifices on both the US military's part and the Iraqi civilians' part. And I'm talking about the Iraqi civilians who risked their own lives to help the US military. Because they wanted a good future, a safe future for their families. They didn't see us as occupiers. They did not see us as overlords. They saw us as protectors, as benefactors in a way, and as those whose presence stopped a lot of potential terrorist attacks from happening. You could agree with the reasons why we went in, like I said, or not, but this does not take away from what I saw personally. And what I saw personally goes against what the media spun. So basically, when I was serving, I was a bad guy. That's how the military painted me, and that's how you're painting us right now. Whose sacrifices get elevated and publicized, however, is precisely the issue. Because it's the US military. We're supposed to be the bad guys. Very few people are curious about what it's like to be an Iraqi civilian, Tamte said in a previous interview with Games Industry Biz. Nobody's going to play that game, but people are curious what it's like to be in combat. It's the same reason people play survival horror games, being in a situation that is beyond what we have in our normal lives. Ultimately, the reason why people are going to play this game is because they want a more realistic combat experience. That, above all else, is the experience that we must deliver. Like I said, 1, it is at its core a first-person shooter game. That is the premise that most people are going into wanting to play. And 2, I'm sorry if you don't like this, but yes, sad as it is, most people are not curious about what it's like to be an Iraqi civilian. I'm sorry. Most people have different concerns on their minds right now. And they're not people who are going to be buying this game are going to be buying it for the tactical shooter aspect, not for the social fucking commentary. 6 days in Fallujah may end up being a critical look at the myriad ways people suffered during the battle. It looks to be the case if you actually bother to stop and look at what was really happening, what the reality is, and how the developers are saying it's putting you into that moral gray area where you're faced with the dilemma of whether or not you shoot someone or not. For example, if you shoot the person, him or her, and they don't shoot back, well, guess what? They're an innocent civilian, and you just saved them. You protected them, you went about and killed the actual bad guys. But if you don't shoot them and they shoot you, because I'll reiterate this when I talk about the enemies we faced, you're dead. Those were the moral dilemmas we had to face. I didn't like it. No one liked to be facing that dilemma of having to shoot a man, a woman, or even a fucking child. No one wanted to be faced with that situation. But the terrorists put us in that situation because we couldn't tell who the enemy was half the time. Until they picked up a gun. Or a rocket. Or placed an IED. I'm not trying to trivialize the deaths. But that's some of the situations we faced. Do we shoot them or not? Because if we don't, and they pick up a gun, we risk getting killed ourselves. And at whose hands, but time and again the game's shooter marketing has cut against that possibility. Everyone can and should interrogate how the game is shown, whether it should even exist, and what it ends up being. Questioning it is one thing. Spinning it is another. That's what you're fucking doing, Kotaku. That's what you're doing, little Ethan. What you don't need to do is host and elevate a trailer that whitewashes, oh fucking god, a shameful moment in history into a tactical simulation. So if they said it in Vietnam, would that have been any fucking better? 6 Days in Fallujah is a shooter because that's what sells, but no one else has to help them do it. You're fucking helping them do it, Kotaku. You're most likely going to boost the sales with this shit. But, again, like I said, I'm going to describe the enemies we faced, because you like to put them in quotes right here. Let me describe to you the enemies we faced. Because they could be men, they could be women. There were no defining sides like what we saw in World War I and World War II, where there was a definite good and bad side necessarily. There was no, like those silent films where the villain is always shown with a thick mustache that he's twisting there. Like, oh, you could tell that's the bad guy. No, nothing like that at all. Nothing like that at all. They would take pot shots, either with guns or rockets, into crowds. If they killed a U.S. military or civilian, they were perfectly happy with it. They didn't care, because all these people cared about, once they fired off those pot shots, once they set off that IED, was blending into the local populace and watching the media run with it. And that's all they cared about. The end game for these people was power. They didn't care how they achieved power. They used terrorism for those particular goals of painting one side, us in particular, as the bad guys, as them as freedom fighters, and our mainstream media fucking ran with it half the time. But they fired indiscriminately into crowds. They did not care who they hit. They did not care if a majority of the victims were the local populace, because in their minds, they were sending them to Allah and a better afterlife. That's what these people thought. In their own twisted, warped fucking minds. That's what these people thought. And they would blend back into the local populace. So we couldn't tell who the bad guys were. They weren't wearing uniforms at all. We couldn't fucking tell. Those are the moral dilemmas that we faced. Again, sorry. Those are the situations we faced. 2020's clarity is, the hindsight is fine with you keyboard warriors, with your, armchair general perspectives in this case. But when you have actual boots on ground, when you're trying to face that situation and decide whether or not you're going to fucking fire at a child who's walking at you wearing a suicide vest that terrorists put onto him, crying, knowing that he's likely going to die, and if you got close to him, you were going to die as well, because you could see the terrorist in the distance with a fucking trigger ready to blow the kid up, and tragedy happened. Did you cover those stories? No. These are the same people who would put weapons, rockets, guns, what have you, into hospitals, schools, and mosques. So if at all we fired any missiles in that general area, and those got impacted because of the arsenal that was in them based on the blast radius, we were the fucking bad guys. Never mind that they knew our rules of engagement, and we would never target those locations, and they used that to their advantage to target us and the local populace. Never fucking mind that. Do you at all have any perspective on what you're writing about, what you're talking about when you are trying to put your fucking spin on this game? No, you don't. No, you don't. You did not serve alongside Iraqi civilians. You did not talk to them. You did not see the fear in their eyes when they realized, hey, these guys are going to leave, and these terrorists are going to go full force on us. The fear, the worry, the apprehension of possibly having to uproot their families and leave the country that they themselves grew up in, that they themselves considered home. Did you ever fucking stop to think about that? No, you didn't. It seems like these that piss me off. So I'm sorry for the rant, sorry for the long video, but that's it. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Do you agree with me and think Kotaku and IGN are asshats, particularly for writing this shit? Or do you agree with their perspective? Let me know that, as well as whether or not you're going to buy this game or not. I said I'm not exactly anticipating the game, but I might buy it out of pure spite. Let me know all that fun stuff down in the comments below. If you like this video, leave a thumbs up, share on social media if you will. This is Mara Jade, catch you on the dark side. Again, sorry for the rant, but it had to be done, and fuck you, Kotaku.